That's how it is for me every time I go out in the woods. So I happen to know a special effects guy that did practical effects for Steven Spielberg. He said he had a couple electric explosions laying around. And this part is true. And I said, well, I need to make a video. So all that stuff was made up just so I could jump in front of that explosion. So as you can see, this is me with my pet squirrel. He's actually my office squirrel, Walnut. And I keep company with him. He's actually my alert when I'm sleeping. He looks for Bigfoot when I'm not around. The toughest part for me is deciding what outfit to wear during these events. It's either the red and black or the black and red. I think I made a pretty good decision today. And so even though I'm an enthusiast, I guess I can be called a professional since I paid to look for Bigfoot. I've been on the TV show Finding Bigfoot 3 times. They're no longer running, but they ran strong for about 8 seasons, and they peaked at about 10 million viewers per episode. Also, I was on OPB, on Think Out Loud. They wanted to talk to me about Bigfoot, so I was able to talk to them about Bigfoot, which was really exciting that when respectable people started to respect me for being on OPB. You know, Bigfooting is not just a hobby anymore. I'm on the radio. I must be somebody. So, it might be odd for someone to think about, why would you do research on something where there's no direct evidence? You don't even have a body. And most Bigfooters, although they wish or they hope to see a Bigfoot, they have to come to grips with knowing that Bigfoot's elusive. Only a few people get a Bigfoot encounter, and it's almost never on purpose, right? So, what kind of research does research on no direct evidence? We don't have a body, and you can assume that you may never see one. Is that even a reliable type of science or research? Well, people do that actually. They're called paleontologists. There's no body, there's no direct evidence. And I guarantee you most paleontologists, unless they watch Jurassic Park, does not think they'll ever see a dinosaur. And that's kind of my approach to Bigfooting, right? People ask me all the time if I'm a believer, and I think that it's good to be healthy and skeptical, but so my answer to them is I'm a Bigfoot hopeful. I would love Bigfoot to be out there. Many of you guys know that are familiar with this. This is a Bigfoot. A lot of people say, here he is. This is actually a female, and for academic purposes, and later on I'm going to talk about her breasts. If I was more mature, I'd feel more comfortable talking about it, but I'm not. But I'll have 2 other slides that why this is important. Her name is Patty. This is one of the best evidence that academic professors and anthropologists and believe that we have for Bigfoot. This was back in 1967. You'll notice that that this is iconic. So almost every Bigfoot symbol, whether it's a bumper sticker or whether it's a logo for a company, is in that position. You can also guess that the walk sign also stole this from the Bigfoot. So the original footage is a little bit sketchy. So this is what it looks like. We won't go through the whole thing, but shaky camera, horror movie like thing. It's really hard to see anything or any details. Well, this clip that people use and see has actually made more money than the Zapruder film. This clip actually, the estate of the person who filmed this got $21 million. The Zapruder film, the assassination of JFK, only clocked in at $7 million. That's how valuable this clip is. And they're about the same length. So someone did go in there and stabilized it, and we were able to get a much cleaner image. So a lot of people don't realize that the frame of the film was actually that big. What you're seeing on TV in these documentaries is someone zoomed in and is following it, and that's why it's shaking. So one of the important things is these 2 trees right here is one of the best evidences that how tall this thing is. So there's an argument, and I think you can still make a safe argument that this is a creature in a costume. Although some of the greatest creators that did the King Kong outfit and Tarzan, Greystoke, Legend of Tarzan, who have done special effects, even those Hollywood guys say we couldn't have reproduced this in 1967. The technology wasn't there. We couldn't get those muscle movements underneath the fur. But again, when it walks between these two trees, they were able to measure those trees. The two trees are still there today. This is in Bluff Creek, California. But back then, this was 8 feet tall. So this Bigfoot is about 7.5 foot tall. So it would be very hard for a human to be that tall. So best evidence. And again, one of the unique features is, of course, the, not my term, pendulous breasts.
What year was this now?
1967, Bluff Creek, California. The term Bigfoot actually didn't come up until 1958. To answer your question, should we call it Sasquatch or should we call it Bigfoot, right? So Bigfoot was coined obviously because that's the first evidence they had was a giant foot in the ground. And this is I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but when they wrote about it in the newspaper, it was big space foot. It was 2 words, right? And eventually that term got coined in 1958. And shortly after that, they got this film, and Bigfoot kind of took over. Sasquatch is actually an indigenous term, which most people prefer. I guess you could say that's probably more politically correct, you know. But Sasquatch is what the community likes to call it. Some people are very sensitive and feel like Bigfoot is kind of like a commercialization. I don't have a preference myself. I like Bigfoot because everybody knows what that is. Sasquatch is starting to get more popular, more well known. But I do like the word Bigfoot. So, if you go to a bookstore and you want to do Bigfoot research or you want to get a book on Bigfoot, you're going to find Bigfoot next to unicorns, fairies, leprechauns, vampires, werewolves, and so. What's that?
UFOs?
Yeah, yes, and that's great, and I have a slide for that too. So the thing is Bigfoot is definitely in this category of fantastical creatures, right? But my appeal, and I got introduced to Bigfoot when I was in 2nd grade. Our library had a Time Life book, and that was the first time that I saw that we could have a mystical, magical kind of creature that doesn't require magic, right? This is a mystery that doesn't need magic to exist, you know? So that's why I've always kind of loved Bigfoot, and that's why I'm more on the what we call biological Bigfoot. There are people that think Bigfoot is more than just a regular flesh and blood physical reality thing. I'll get into that in a second. But I like that Bigfoot is basically something that we haven't discovered yet, and it's just as plausible as us. Especially, so this is a skeleton that they discovered most recently. The first time that they found that a primate could stand upright is actually 400 million years ago. So it's not so weird for a primate to actually stand upright and walk amongst themselves. And again, if you look at this almost looks exactly like Patty. The hair pattern is the same, the breasts. The only thing that's different is these feet, right? And a professor in Idaho State University will say this is because this particular species was still climbing trees. So while this creature could walk upright, they still needed these feet for what's called branchiation or brachiation, right? To go from branch to branch, right? But there is a fossil record of something very similar to Bigfoot. Just like dinosaurs. They do the same thing. They take a skeleton, put some muscles on it, and they try to project what might be that creature. Now these are guesses, they don't know, but they're pretty close guesses, and they improve those guesses over time. One of the biggest things about dinosaur research recently is they found out that the pelvis is turned just like birds. And if you've watched Jurassic Park, that's one of the things they talk about, that dinosaurs are more related to birds as opposed to slow, cold-blooded lizards, right? And that was a whole paradigm shift. So same things happen in the Bigfoot world. So Bigfoot is like paleontology, kind of. Okay, so I'd like to talk about some of the biggest arguments against Bigfoot. So there's an empty fossil record. Well, we talked about there might be a fossil record. Forget fossils, where are the bodies? If anybody has gone hunting, how many people have ever seen a bear carcass or a cougar carcass, right? You don't see it, besides you two. The breeding population would be tens of thousands, right? They think that you really only need a breeding population of 800 to have a good enough breeding population. Most evidence are circumstantial, eyewitness reports. True, although we do have that one video. Most photos are ambiguous and can be faked. This is also true. And there are no rigorous documented peer-reviewed evidence for Bigfoot. Actually, there's a monthly academic article done by Idaho State University called the Relic Hominoid Theory. And it's a peer-reviewed academic article where they talk about Bigfoot every month, and it's reviewed by other scientists. It's reputable. And so there are scientists that are taking Bigfoot seriously. Here's some of my favorite arguments for Bigfoot. Centuries of indigenous oral traditions. Native Americans, First Nations people in Canada have been talking about Bigfoot for a long time. The panda, pretty big animal, right? Wasn't even discovered until 1869. It's not weird to think that an animal can be discovered nowadays. The gorilla, the mountain gorilla specifically, wasn't discovered until 1902, right? That's not too long ago. There are 77 Bigfoot variants worldwide. Almost every continent and every country has their version of Bigfoot. And there's even documentation predating Columbus by 500 years, where Vikings saw a large hairy man in North America. Teddy Roosevelt wrote about a Bigfoot sighting, and Jane Goodall, the chimpanzee primatologist, is a believer. She really feels like there's a lot of plausibility to Bigfoot existing. Now, this is just a random ink blot test. If you see something in there, it's just you. But Bigfoot is subjective, so even though I have a scientific kind of biological take on Bigfoot, the community as a whole is not necessarily all with me, right? There's all sorts of debates that we have. Whether you should kill Bigfoot to have a species, whether you should not kill Bigfoot because it's sentient like us, you know. Is Bigfoot an animal or is Bigfoot more of a human, right? Here are some of the theories that Bigfooters have, and I've kind of categorized them. Some people think that Bigfoot goes all the way back to the Bible, New Testament, right? So Nephilim, Esau, and there's a passage where he said he was born with red hair, covered with red hair, so not just the top of his head, but his whole entire body. And there are some theories that Cain, being the marked one, is the first Bigfoot. Native American. So Native Americans and indigenous people, First Nations people, talk about Bigfoot as well. It's more of a spirit. So for Native Americans, Bigfoot can be on this physical plane, but it can also be in a spiritual realm as well. So this is Sasquatch, which is actually where we get the anglicized version of Sasquatch. And then we've got the Bookwoos. And again, this is the last time I'm going to talk about pendulous breasts. Is right here we have the Sonnequa, and you'll notice this mouth shape is for whistling, right? And so there's actually tons of audio recordings of people who have had Bigfoot encounters, and it's a whistling-like sound, very similar to like a barn owl almost. So a lot of these Native American stories kind of go with some of the more modern things that we are finding in Bigfoot research. There's also the conspiracy ones. These are kind of fun for me because I was a big fan of X-Files. But there's the Anunnaki. So in Sumerian clay tablets, there are some texts about ancient aliens that are going to return to Earth. And when they return to Earth, Bigfooters think they're going to round up the Bigfoot or whatever, or Bigfoot were left behind. It's way more complicated than I have time for. Stalin's army. So in the 1920s, after World War I, it's well documented that Stalin tried to create an ape-human army. And I know it sounds fantastic, but some people think that Bigfoot is a result of Stalin's initiative to create this ape-human Army, and this is a fun one. You take a chimp and you take a human, and you get a chimp, or you get a humanzee. So there's a lot of people. So there's a lot of people that think there's current day experiments of people trying to make a hybrid of a human and a chimpanzee, and I just like saying humanzee a lot. So, and then there's also the dimensional shapeshifter. And again, I don't really fall into any of these categories, but I want to kind of give you guys a sense of what the community thinks and what kind of debates that we have, right? And so in UC Berkeley, in the labs, during the time that Stephen Hawking was there, there's a story that they had a Bigfoot trapped in a force field, and he escaped, and he scared a bunch of ladies in the coffee room. It's a great story. But the best part is the reason why he escaped is someone actually accidentally pushed the off button on the force field. So it's too simple. All right. So again, the reason why Bigfoot is actually gaining traction among academics now is because this is I believe her name is Elsie, but this skeleton was just found recently, like within the last 10 years. And when they realized that in the fossil record that primates were bipedal a lot earlier than we had previously thought, it kind of shifted the paradigm. Also, when they found Homo florensis, which are also called the hobbits, out in Indonesia, they found shorter humans that were different species, not short humans, but shorter primates that lived during the same time as Homo sapiens, right? So this changed everything because there used to be something called, So they're still trying to speculate, like, how far back does Bigfoot go? So this is Gigantopithecus, a specimen that they found in China. There's a Paranthropus and Homo erectus. These are three categories or candidates that we think might be relatives of Bigfoot, if you buy into that. But we really weren't sure because there used to be what was called a single species hypothesis, right? Meaning that any species that dominated its environment could only exist by itself. So basically, you couldn't have another lion in the same area because the lion was the apex predator, or the shark is the apex predator, or a primate, being a smart, handy with tools, would be all by itself, right? There's nobody else that could compete because he would be the highest competitor out there, and there wouldn't be room for anybody else. But the truth is, there were all these other bipeds around in the fossil record. And in fact, 6 of these guys shared the planet at the same time. So there was a period when Earth was literally the planet of the apes. So where is Bigfoot? Well, there's a national database that keeps track of all these. And I'll zoom in on this. So, Clackamas, right there, 27. Clackamas has the biggest sightings per capita in history.
Does Clackamas also have the highest percentage of bars?
Absolutely. But you can see it's an outlier. It's not even a little bit. It outnumbers everything. So, Bigfoot's in our backyard, and people come from all over the world to come to Clackamas to do Bigfoot research. And if you want to see this in a visual way, all these dots are basically multiple sightings. The bigger the dot, the more sightings. I'll zoom in on this. So you can see again, we're pretty big. So Cowlitz County is pretty big, but this is Clackamas right here. So if you are going to go out there this weekend or over the summer and you want to look for Bigfoot, you guys are going to have better luck than most other people in the world. So at the end, I just want to let you know that it's not so much that I'm a believer, but I'm a Bigfoot hopeful. Thank you, guys.
Does you were going to talk about the foot lead anyway.
Yeah, I can, yeah. So,
We got 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
We got 5 minutes.
There's gonna be lots of questions.
Sure, yeah.
Did you see that picture recently on the news of that, I don't know if it was a mountain gorilla or whatever he was, but he was walking upright?
Yeah.
And I guess when he goes and gets snacks, he's in a zoo somewhere.
Yeah,
When
I've
he
seen
gets
it, yes.
snacks, he walks upright.
Yeah, so there's nothing that prevents a gorilla or chimpanzee, from walking upright. They're just not inclined to do it. I mean, their hips are a little bit, and they don't have the back and the butt muscles to really sustain that like we do.
But he walked a long ways that way.
Yeah. And once they build up that ability, they can. So this was cast in 1982 by a sheriff in Grays Harbor, Washington. And this is one of my favorite casts. Not only do you, most casts you see are they don't have all the toes and they don't have this much definition. And I think that, whenever you see a cast, the important thing to remember is this is not a cast of the foot. This is really a cast of the damage that the foot does to the ground. And that's an important distinction, right? Because there's a bunch of animation that happens and a bunch of movement that displaces the mud and moves things around. So what you're really seeing is a snapshot of emotion hitting the ground and coming back up. The reason why this one is so significant is, number one, the witness. It was a sheriff, was willing to, while he was still a sheriff, was willing to tell everybody that he thought he saw Bigfoot tracks. The other great thing about this is usually when you see a track or you see a cast, it's just one print, maybe two print. This is series 1 of 9. There was 9 of these that were about 5 feet away from each other. So someone either had to be on stilts or they had to be a good triple jumper from the Olympics in order to make these tracks. Now it's all doable, but there's certain features in here that we know that show that it's not just like a wooden plank and stuff like that. There's actually animation, there's movement, and there's angles in here. But this is one of my favorites because of the witness, because of how recent it is, and also just how you can see the toe stems. And that's I don't know why, but I get excited to see toe stems. So that's this one. And the largest tracks ever seen or found was 127 in London, Oregon. And there's 127 tracks in a row.
Wow. That's where I grew
Are
up.
there other states that are getting involved? Is it predominantly on the West Coast or?
Yeah, so Bigfoot's everywhere. And in fact, they have different names for them. So in Oklahoma, they call it the booger. In Florida, they call it the skunk ape. If you look at precipitation maps on any piece of land, where the rain is focused the most is where the Bigfoot sightings overlap. And that wasn't planned by anyone. You can just actually take a precipitation map and you can take a sightings map, lay them on top of each other, and they almost overlap completely. So anywhere where there's a lot of precipitation, you're bound to have a Bigfoot sightings.
So where does the abominable snowman fall into this thing? Isn't that sort of a big?
So that's in Nepal, yeah. So the abominable snowman would be a different species, and then in one of my slides I said there's 77 variants. So even Japan has a version of Bigfoot, which would be surprising to biologists because it's an island, right? But the abominable snowman is the Yeti. It's the same thing as a Yeti, and it's in Nepal.
In Nepal. Okay.
About 20 years ago, I was hunting out in Tillamook and talked to an old grandpa hunter I knew out there. This guy was as straight as could be. He said, I haven't told many this, but I was up on a stand hunting deer, little fawn across the opening there, right on the edge of the clear cut. I'm sitting there looking, and he said this very tall, big thing.
Yeah.
It just like shot out, grabbed it, and that was that. He said it was that fast. And I really didn't tell many because they thought it'd be crazy, but I saw it.
Right.
And I looked at that calf on that video. You could see the calf muscle flex as that thing walked away.
Wow. Yeah, and those things are, the guy who basically did the gorillas for Legend of Greystoke, which he got an Academy Award for it, and has done tons of primate costumes. Said there's no way we could have done that. Gorilla costumes back in 1967 look like costumes. There's a thing called stovepiping on the legs where you don't get the definition because it basically looks like a stovepipe, and that's why they call it stovepiping. Yeah.
You used the 1967 film as the primary proof. you will. But wasn't that the Peterson film?
Patterson.
Patterson film?
Patterson
And wasn't
Gimlin, yeah.
that Patterson film, once he died,
Right.
and didn't the family come out?
There's a Seattle Post article where the son said that it was a deathbed confession, and so it wasn't. It was debunked, right?
Right.
So there was one article, but Bob Gimlin, who's still alive, who was the other guy that was there, comes to Gresham once in a while. I have breakfast with him at Sweet Betty's, and which is his favorite breakfast spot. Sorry, M&Ms, but he was there, and if you met this man, he's an old cowboy. He has nothing to. He's never made a dime off of that film. It was actually Patterson's estate that got all that money. Gimlin is the other guy, and he didn't make a dime off of it, but he's the salt of the earth type of guy. So yeah, there's one newspaper article where there was a deathbed confession, and to this day, Roger Patterson, nobody has ever heard that from Roger Patterson that he had hoaxed it, right?
Sorry, it's lunch, but what about scat?
Right.
Right? Because these are big creatures.
Right.
You'd think that if they're out there, and then we would have a better idea of what they ate.
Yeah.
Right? When you think of primates, too, that's part of evolution they're coming from if they're.
Yeah, I'm surprised how many marriages survive in Bigfooting with how much scat is in freezers. So,
Really?
yes. So that's something that a lot of people collect. Now, and so,
Seriously?
yes, I don't. For the record, I don't have any scat in my freezer. I'm not that dedicated, right? But there are a lot of Bigfooters that actually think that they find scat. But the problem is most Bigfooters are also kind of conspiracy theorists. So they're afraid to share this with the university because they're afraid they're not going to get their sample back, and so they're just hoarding scat, which sounds even funnier when I say it out loud.
Rotary Club.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever said
From
that.
that, are they seeing bones? I mean, like the talk, whatever it is out there. Are they seeing fawn bones, or are they seeing
Yeah,
herbal fiber?
Yeah, so they do think that they're omnivores, right? And so there are certain plants that are actually poisonous to us, that are not poisonous to someone with an esophagus that big. And so that's why there's definitely enough calories out there to support an 800-pound creature. But there's also evidence of them going after ungulates, four-legged animals like deer and elk and stuff like that. So, and there's plenty of stories of them chasing them down and grabbing them by their hind legs. So they are, so the theory is they are omnivores.
I somehow knew that might be the last question. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Can I mind if I get a selfie in here real quick?
Turn around.
Okay. Can I get a thumbs up from everybody?
We're all believers. We don't know shit.
You moved, it's gonna be blurry.
Oh, let me try. Let me turn off the flash. I'm sorry.
We're gonna do it again?
Let me turn off the flash.
Of all the ones where we didn't
Okay.
have a film.
You guys, one more time.